Today is April 4th, 2019, and I'm back in the San Rafael Swell area on the north side of I-70, not too far from where I was about a week ago, although this time I drove in through Castledale instead of skirting around the north side to gain access. This time I'm aiming to explore the Sids Mountain Wilderness Study area. I'm planning to explore Sids Mountain Trail, which leads all the way up to Sid's Cabin, about 4.5 miles away from the trailhead. At first glance, it may seem like a sort of desert scrubland with not much going on, but I find this area every bit as interesting as the more popular national park areas, with of course way less visitors. Certainly a limiting factor is the long unimproved roads that one must travel to get into this area. With that in mind, you want to come with emergency supplies that will last you for some time in case you get yourself in a situation where you need to wait for the road to dry out for it to become passable. And as always, be sure to check the forecast for any flash flood potential, especially in the summer months between July and September is when the highest potential for flash floods occurs out here on the Colorado Plateau. There is a separate trailhead for horseback that's a little south of the hikers trailhead that I'm gonna look for. A description I read on the Trails Illustrated map described it as a steep and narrow slot canyon to access the salt wash that must be crossed to access the lion's share of the trail. In any case, hopefully the roads will continue to be good on my way to Sids Mountain Trailhead, and we'll see how I go. Scanning over the landscape from the rim near the trailhead. Definitely some rigorous, slippery looking soil here. I could take that horseback trail, but that would add roughly 5 miles each way to the trip. So I'm gonna see if I can find a way down, sort of a shortcut on foot here, with the understanding that I can double back as long as I don't choose too strenuous, too steep of a route. We'll see how I go. This trip has just begun, but the adventure in route finding is already well underway, with this canyon having me a bit cliffed out. So with that, I'm gonna go and try the other side to try to drop down this Navajo sandstone here. Hopefully there's a rock spill or something over on that side. I ended up finding some rock cairns that are just on the other side of that little sort of ridge I was on. So followed those down, and it appears like that'll be able to lead me to the canyon floor. I decided to take my pack off and pursue some light stemming just to get down this little section here. Today's April 5th, 2019, and I'm enjoying the chorus of birds here in the Sids Mountain Wilderness Study area. I didn't make it that far last night. I got off to a characteristically late start and made it down to the canyon floor in about an hour and a half. Had to correct my course once or twice, and yeah, with about an hour of daylight left, I decided to just camp here. Not more than, I would say, I don't know, a half mile from the car as the crow flies. From here I'll be able to leave most of my gear here and do the yo-yo day hike to Sid's cabin. At least that's the plan. There will probably be a water crossing here shortly before I make my ascent up onto Sid's Mountain and hopefully find Sid's cabin. There was a new moon last night, so it was a great night to be out here in the desert, especially in an area with such low light pollution, as is the case here in the San Rafael Swell. If I'm lucky today, I might even see some desert bighorn sheep. We'll see how I go. South of the salt wash, the trail has actually been pretty easy to follow. At times following the tracks of cow, bighorn sheep, and of course horses. And even some prints that might be wildcat, but hard for me to say. And now after getting above the rim of the canyon and walking along the sort of plateau up top here, come to an interesting fence line of sorts. Maybe at one point it was used as a corral for cattle. As you can see how the logs have been sort of piled up there, overlooking a broader sort of gorge with what appears to be a natural sort of bunker with even some historical trash left over, some old tin cans there, perhaps from an old cowboy camp. This trail follows a nice, relatively flat plateau, which makes for less strenuous, easier travel on the way to Sid's cabin. In any case, I'm coming up on Sid's cabin now with a more formal fence line and even some snowpack right over there, which is a fine exhibit of just how well shaded that particular side of the rock is there. This area is reminiscent of Chesler Park in the way that there's abundant vegetation surrounded by a sort of rampart of rocks on at least three sides, and quite the braided trail system, which is typical of what cattle create on the way into Sid's cabin. Next to the cabin here is a outbuilding of sorts, some old rusted tin cans, and another fence that's probably the most robust I've seen thus far. Would have to assume for use as a cattle corral. An old bed spring over there, some other historical trash, one might call it, as well as what remains of some old metal equipment. Perhaps an old stove is what that looks like to me, with the latch to keep it closed there. For the main cabin that still has a roof, it's held up quite well actually, considered it was built more than 80 years ago. Some old farming equipment strewn about here. You could see where the door fell off and got tossed aside there. And the wood burning stove here, it's in quite good shape actually.
The chimney still sort of intact. A variety of tin cans there as well. And some other old kitchen and equipment and dishes and whatnot. Campbell's soup signage still decorates, as well as some natural light, unopened. Swollen in some cases. A six-pack waiting for a thirsty visitor, I suppose. Yeah, the floor's in impressively good condition as well, even if the roof has seen better days. So a fine job done by Clayton Cofford and his sons back in 1936. And a fine spot for me to enjoy some lunch before I head back to Sids Mountain Hiker Trailhead where I came from. It's interesting how the cabin was built on stilts here. Doesn't seem like it would be subject to flooding in this particular spot, but maybe it was. I can only imagine that sourcing water must have been quite a challenge for this ranching operation. There are some springs noted in Saddle Horse Canyon that would be closer than Saltwash, where I came from, about 4.2 miles back there. But I can only assume that water was the main challenge, as it is with many activities in the desert. Yeah, so maybe that had something to do with the ranching operation going by the wayside here. An interesting piece of history here in Sids Mountain Wilderness Study Area. Just outside the fence of Sid's cabin corral here. Beneath the tree I found quite a large glob of sap or resin. I'm assuming it came from this juniper tree here. Reminds me of John Wesley Powell's expedition and what they used to patch their boats with. In the story of Powell's expedition down the Colorado, the maiden voyage that happened about 150 years ago, they talked about having to climb all the way up the canyon walls just to get at the resin or the sap, much like this. And yeah, having to continually patch their boats up and keep them floating well enough to get down those various drops and obstacles in the Colorado during both expeditions, actually. Yeah, definitely got a sap-like smell as well. In any case, another opportunity to reflect on some Old West history here. Same as on the way down. This is the biggest problem on the way up as well. Didn't require a rope, but I was able to set my pack just up there on the ledge where I'll be able to walk around and get it after I climbed up this little problem here that just required some light stemming. So good to be prepared for that if you're gonna take on this particular route. There might be an easier way down on the other little side canyon here, but I'm not quite out of the woods yet. The first part of the descent after leaving my car at the trailhead was fairly slippery, so I'm hoping I can just go back up the same way I came without too much difficulty. I made it back to the car about 24 hours after leaving last night.
after a slippery ascent up a somewhat risky collection of layers there. It ended up being roughly 11 miles or so round trip. So for people able to make an earlier start than I am, it could definitely be done as a day hike. Really enjoyed being able to get back to the San Rafael Swell and look forward to my next trip here. That's all for now. See you next time.
On the next Backpacker Diaries.
Quite a bit of water.
Oh, here we go. A little splashy splash, huh?
Uh-huh.